There's literally only one place in the entire northern hemisphere that fills white phosphorus munitions.
Before I get started with the actual video, I'm going to talk a little bit about a specific story from the Bible. There is a story where Jesus comes across a man who is possessed by many demons. And when Jesus asks the man what his name was, he says, "I am Legion, for there are many within me." The long and short of the story goes that as Jesus exorcises the man, he then gets pleaded at by the demons to be released instead of from the man into Hades to go to a herd of swine that were being raised by the local Israelites. The last time I heard any priest talk about this particular passage in the Bible, they brought up in their homily about why were the Israelites raising the swine? The idea that you would raise these things that you don't find fit for you, fit to be among you, and would have them to profit off of and go out and, sell to others. Kind of a do unto others kind of a deal. Now, when I saw this video today, I was on break at work, and he goes on to explain about how there is only one factory in the northern hemisphere that makes white phosphorus munitions, and it is in Arkansas. Now, white phosphorus is a compound that is used primarily to make smoke screens, specifically due to its chemical property of creating smoke when it comes into contact with the atmosphere. Well, really, the oxygen in the atmosphere. You see, after that break, I had a little bit of a slow time, and so I had the ability to do some reading. And while I don't work as a chemist, I do need to know a lot of chemistry to do my job, as well as the fact that I do work in a hospital lab. So, reading what I was reading, I can imagine how this stuff can happen. Now, for something to be on fire, it needs three things. It needs heat, a source, and oxygen. And the thing is, if you're lighting white phosphorus, it's already volatile at oxygen, against the oxygen in general. So it's very difficult to actually remove the heat from the white phosphorus. In fact, you can take a chunk of white phosphorus, light it on fire, and it will be, it'll be lit up. And then you could put a glass over it, and you can see the entire glass fill up with smoke, and you think all the oxygen's gone, so you'll remove the glass, and the phosphorus will still be alight. This is because it's still warm from the fire that you just try to put out. It doesn't need much. In fact, the same situation could happen if you bury white phosphorus, because white phosphorus, when buried, you hit it with a shovel, and not only are you creating a spark from, cracking the white phosphorus, but the heat difference between how cold the ground is underneath the ground versus the surface level room temperature, that's enough to cause things. And like napalm, when this substance gets in contact with your skin, it will leave scars. And napalm scars can be arguably a little nicer than white phosphorus, because white phosphorus can melt all the way through the flesh, the muscle tissue, the sinew, all the way down to the bone. This is why it's considered a war crime to use white phosphorus in combat zones and in civilian areas. But then again, who gives a shit about war crimes if you're the United States or the 51st state? And the thing is, this isn't the first time I ended up ever researching white phosphorus. The first time was a little over a year ago. you see, I was noticing someone mentioning that the Russian Federation and the paramilitary groups it employed were utilizing white phosphorus in their actions in Ukraine. And the Western media outlets were condemning the Russians for this terrible use of white phosphorus. Oh, it's a war crime. Terrible, terrible, terrible. But, it's used by the 51st state, and nothing happens. Because like all capitalists, the United States government follows the rules of acquisition. And the 34th rule of acquisition is that war is good for business. All that aid going outside of the country, financial aid going to the 51st state or Ukraine, and then it'll come right back, right to Lockheed Martin and Boeing and all of the other arms manufacturers. And of course, why expect this government to act any differently than it already is? I mean, they censured Rashida Tlaib, the only Palestinian representative of our government, who, while representing her people, both ethnically and the people she was elected to represent, was censured for speaking out against the active genocide committed against her people by the 51st state of the United States. And of course, another member of Congress doesn't have anything said against him by anyone with any actual authority when he calls for that same people to be flattened and turned into a parking lot. I feel like until recently, people in this country didn't understand the terrors of war. I mean, hell, even in the Civil War, most of the fighting was in the South. It's so easy to think of war when you have to go to a place where you don't even know where to point it out on a map. Partially because the education system won't tell you how to locate things on a map. Partially because that makes it easier for you to dehumanize them and alienate yourself from them. It makes it easier to sell pigs and white phosphorus while claiming to be in the right. And I by no means mean for that parable or story I told at the beginning to be taken anything against the Jewish people. Because I know the Jewish people are against what is going on in the 51st state. And I know that between the time that these words leave my lips and the time that they reach your ears, there have definitely been more people who are... And I know that for a fact between the time that these words leave my lips and that they reach your ears, more people are suffering from the actions of this country. And meanwhile here you're told that you either can go with Genocide Joe, otherwise you're giving it to Trump. There's no difference between either party. They're both white supremacists. And sometimes they like to throw a little phosphate into that equation. Educate, agitate, and organize. Solidarity.